My daughter and grandson are dead, forget it. I will never forgive you. My mother was a very cold person when I was young, and I didn't like her. When my husband, Keigo, heard her words on the phone, he was very upset. Maybe you're not lying. I don't care. But if you are, you'll be in trouble, the voice said in a creepy way. I could almost picture her smiling just from hearing her voice. Good, let's go then. I think we're the ones who are in trouble, my mother said before hanging up the phone. My name is Lily, and I'm 33 years old. I work in an office. I met my husband, Keigo, through my grandmother, who goes to a tea ceremony class. I don't really like this grandmother of mine. Keigo is the grandson of someone she met at the tea ceremony class. He's a nice person, though. Lily, please just meet him once so you can see for yourself, she insisted. I was forced to meet him, even though I never thought I'd go to an arranged marriage meeting. At that time, I was almost 30, and I knew I'd get married one day. In the end, I gave in to my grandmother's pressure. But when I met Keigo, I was happy to find out that he and his parents were kind people. After dating for a year, I married Keigo, and we are still together. My husband's family runs a company, and since Keigo is their only son, he will be the next president. My family is just normal, so when my friends and coworkers found out about my marriage, they were jealous and called me spoiled. You see, I knew you two would get along, my grandmother said. My grandmother was proud of me and Keigo getting married. Keigo's family included his dad, my father-in-law, his mom, my mother-in-law, and his grandmother, my grandmother-in-law. Keigo's grandmother didn't live with them. Keigo's brother had gotten sick and passed away a few years ago, and now his dad runs the company. Keigo lived at home until we got married, and maybe because of that, he never really helped around the house. For example, he would leave his clothes everywhere, and after eating, he wouldn't clean his dishes. If I told him to clean up, he would do it, but only reluctantly. After several months of marriage, nothing really changed, no matter how many times I told him. One day, after I warned him again about his socks, he said, "Why are you making such a big deal out of it? My mom did everything quietly." He joked. "What did you just say? Did you say mom?" I was shocked. "I'm not your mom." I packed up and went back to my parents' house. When I arrived home, my family was surprised, but I lied and said I was lonely because Keigo was away on a business trip. When my grandmother asked me about married life, I said, "It's okay," though I didn't feel that way. She and my dad reminded me not to cause trouble, but my mom asked, "Are you really okay over there?" I just said it was fine, even though I was nervous talking to her. She had always been scary to me. Growing up, my dad was always busy with work and wasn't home much, and my grandfather passed away when I was young. My grandmother seemed to be in charge of everything at home. Whenever I asked my mom about something, she would tell me to ask grandma instead. As a kid, I felt like my mom wasn't interested in me, so I stopped asking her for help. My grandmother was always involved in my life, telling me what to do to make me happy. When I graduated from university, I left home. I didn't fully understand what a family was supposed to be like, but I noticed that Keigo's family always seemed happy and ate together. I had to wait for everyone to be ready before I could eat, and Keigo told me that even after marriage, that tradition didn't change. 3 days after I went back to my parents' house, my grandmother called me while I was resting. To my surprise, Keigo and my mother-in-law were with her. They came to pick me up. Keigo apologized, saying he realized he was spoiled too much by his family. My grandmother told me, "Lily, you're partly to blame too," with a sigh, glancing at my mom. My mom whispered, "I'm sorry, Lily," and my mother-in-law and Keigo came to take me back home. I thought my mother would side with me, but it seemed like it didn't matter. It was pointless to expect anything. As time passed, I realized that things weren't going to change, and I had to accept it. "Should we break up like this?" he asked, but I just replied with one word and left my home. I was quiet in the car on the way back. My mother-in-law spoke up and said, "Lily, if housework is so hard for you, why don't we eat together? I can cook for you and Keigo." I didn't feel happy about her suggestion. I said, "No, not really. I want Keigo to help more with the housework." Before I could finish, she interrupted me. "Why should Keigo do housework? Housework is the wife's job, isn't it?" She looked at me, confused. "But I'm working too," I replied. She shook her head. "Lily, we're not a normal family. Keigo will take over the company one day, and it's your job to take care of everything." I was frustrated. "You want me to quit my job?" I asked. It's not a big deal. I've been working since I graduated, and I enjoy my job and my colleagues. My mother-in-law kept talking without stopping, even though I stayed silent. Then I told her I was pregnant, even though I was told to keep it a secret. The week before, I had found out I was pregnant, and my husband was happy. I knew that being pregnant would make things harder, and since Keigo was going to be a father, I hoped he would help more with the housework. I hadn't been to the doctor yet, and I was feeling irritated. But unexpectedly, my mother-in-law changed her attitude when she heard I was pregnant. She suddenly became gentle, almost like a completely different person. It was confusing. When I got home, I was surprised to find the house clean. "Did you clean it?" I asked Keigo. I sighed. "I wish you had kept the pregnancy a secret," I said. Keigo replied, "My mom has been bothering me for a long time. I didn't tell you because she was upset about the baby. I'm sorry, my husband sincerely thanked me, and looking at him, I thought I should try a little harder. But it wasn't because my mother said it, and eating at my parents' house wasn't such a bad thing. On weekends, I could let myself relax there, so when he asked in such a gentle tone, I couldn't find a reason to refuse. He probably cared about me and my health. I should have said no at this point, but the tough part of my pregnancy was about to start. The next week, I went to the maternity hospital. The doctor confirmed that I was pregnant. I was happy to hear that and promised to give lots of love to my unborn child. Eating at my mother-in-law's house wasn't as bad as I thought. My father-in-law and grandmother-in-law were happy about the pregnancy, and my mother-in-law, though a little old-fashioned, was much better than when she was sarcastic before. I thought I could handle it. But everything changed at dinner the following week. I was at my limit and felt ashamed, but I made a request to my mother-in-law. "I'm sorry, but I've been getting morning sickness for the last few days, and I don't feel well if I don't eat something. Can I eat before everyone else?" I thought she would understand since she'd had kids herself. But her response was unexpected. "Morning sickness? Didn't you hear from Keigo? We have a rule to eat only when everyone's together, so please be patient." Then she added, almost laughing, "Totally nasty." I felt really hurt, and tears filled my eyes. Later, when my father-in-law came home late, I finally ate dinner after 8 p.m. But I couldn't wait that long, so I secretly ate a little bit while my mother-in-law was away. I felt bad for having to hide it. By the time I got home that night, it was past 10 p.m., and I was exhausted. Keigo commented, "Why didn't you eat earlier? Didn't I tell you you should be careful with your sickness?" His response overwhelmed me with anger, and I was too stunned to say anything. After that, I stopped going to my in-laws' house. I told them I wasn't feeling well, but the truth was that the morning sickness was painful, and I wished it would end soon. I loved my baby, though, and tried to stay positive. My father-in-law and grandmother-in-law were understanding. But my mother-in-law didn't stop bothering me. She would call me often, asking if I was coming over, saying Keiko is the only one who always comes here. Isn't that rude? Her constant calls gave me a headache, and I would only pick up when I had to. One day she asked, "Are you feeling better now that your morning sickness is gone?" In a joking way, but she didn't really sympathize with me. Finally, I decided to go back to my parents' house. I was getting into the second half of my pregnancy, and I told my husband I wanted to stay there for a while. He didn't understand and kept calling, even sending messages saying, "Please come back after the baby is born. The baby is our precious heir." He also joked about how my room wasn't clean and that I should tidy up when I return, saying, "Your body will feel better after giving birth." At that moment, I just thought it wasn't good for my stomach. I was so irritated that I just ignored everything. My grandmother noticed and said, "Lily, even after the baby is born, I won't help you with anything." She seemed upset with me, probably because she realized I wasn't getting along with my in-laws. The one good thing about this situation was that I had more chances to talk to my mother. I shared with her everything my husband, Keigo, and my mother-in-law had said to me. Things with Keigo and his mother hadn't been going well for a long time. Even though I was pregnant, Keigo still wouldn't help with the housework. The real reason I came back to my parents' house early was because Keigo had been getting more and more impatient with me. He even yelled at me for being pregnant and shoved me on the shoulder. When I talked to my mother-in-law about it, she just told me to be patient. At one point, I had a bruise from where he shoved me, and I even had a medical certificate for it. I was seriously considering a divorce after the baby was born. My mother was silent for a while, then replied firmly, "I understand." A little while later, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When labor pains started, I contacted Keigo, but he didn't seem to care. His response was that he was too busy with work and that I should tell him when I was discharged from a hospital. I was furious at his attitude, especially since our baby was about to be born. When I was discharged, I didn't contact him, and he didn't reach out to me either. On the day I left the hospital, I was slowly heading back to my parents' house when my phone rang. It was Keigo. I hesitated to answer, but my mother silently took my phone and put it on speaker. "Are you discharged from the hospital today?" Keigo asked. "Why haven't you come home? Mom and I have been waiting for you since this morning. Come home and show the baby to my mom." His voice was loud and demanding, and it made me silent. Then my mother spoke up, saying something outrageous. "Forget it. I'll never forgive you." Keigo was clearly upset. Then I heard his mother's voice. "Is that your voice? You lied to us, didn't you?" Just hearing her voice made my body tremble with disgust. I felt sick just thinking about my mother-in-law and Keigo. My mother stopped me when I tried to respond to them, saying, "Let's go to the police. He's the one who's in trouble for causing bruises." My mother hung up the phone, and I was confused. She then hugged me tightly while I held my son, telling me that everything would be okay. It was the first time my mom had hugged me like that, and I felt so happy to know she was on my side. As I watched my son peacefully sleeping with my mother by my side, my grandmother came back inside with loud footsteps. "What's going on?" "You're still alive," she said. "I just got a call from Keigo's mother, and now I'm going to apologize because you hurt me too." My grandmother, who didn't even care about her own grandchild, tried to force us to go to Keigo's family house. When we arrived at my mother-in-law's house, she and Keigo glared at me and my mom. My mother-in-law came toward me and said, "This child is our precious heir. Come on." But I immediately said, "Don't touch me," without thinking. Keigo then yelled at me, "You should apologize. I only touched your shoulder, and now you're calling the police. That's over the top." I stared at him and said, "I can't divorce you anymore. You didn't even come to see our newborn child. You're going to be a father, and nothing will change for you. I can't imagine a happy future with you." Keigo was surprised and scared by my words about divorce. My mother-in-law then told me, "If you don't mind, you should leave your grandchild and go out alone. Aren't you suffering from postpartum depression? With that crazy mother nearby, who would even joke about death, your grandchild won't grow up right." She said it with a snort, as if she didn't care about anyone. Keigo kept saying that my grandmother should apologize to him and my mother right away. My mom was silent at first, but then she glared at my grandmother and said, "Which one of us is crazy? My precious daughter and grandchild are not your toys." At that moment, there was more yelling coming from the building. Keigo's grandmother smiled at her son and asked, "What's going on here? Can someone explain?" Keigo's grandmother glared at her daughter-in-law, my mother-in-law, with cold eyes and said, "Are you really picking on your wife in this day and age?" It was clear from her words that Keigo's grandmother understood the situation. She looked at my husband and mother-in-law, and their faces turned pale. She continued, "You've become so obsessed with managing the company that you can't even take care of your own wife. Keigo, you still have a long way to go." My grandmother-in-law smiled and said, "Lily, I'll make sure you get the responsibility. I'm sorry I didn't notice what was going on before. If you're going to break up with Keigo, I'd still be happy if you came to see me again." I thanked her, and she looked at my grandmother, who seemed uncomfortable. My grandmother-in-law then said, "I arranged a matchmaking between our grandchildren because you insisted. Lily and her mother are very nice people, but what about you?" She looked at my grandmother, who turned bright red. Then she glanced at my husband and mother-in-law, who seemed lost in shock. I bowed deeply to my grandmother-in-law and left the house with my mom. When we got home and started packing our things, my grandmother said, "Where are you going? I won't let you do what you want." She added, "Your mother-in-law said she won't allow you to divorce her son until you have a child. I've already put up with it." Later, I found out from my mom that my father had been seeing another woman. My grandmother told my mom it was her fault. When my dad asked for a divorce, he said he wouldn't let my mom take me when I was still young. I also learned that my grandmother had never taken care of my grandfather, which was very sad. My mom said to me, "I should have run away with you when I had the chance. If I had done that, you wouldn't have suffered and would have been happy." Her words made me cry. After that, both my mom and I got divorced. My dad didn't want to pay alimony and tried to avoid it, but there was evidence of his long affair. When my mom said she would consult a lawyer, he reluctantly agreed to the divorce. I was shocked to learn how terrible my father had been. I had no intention of seeing him again. My mom also asked for compensation for emotional distress from my grandmother. When I talked to a lawyer, I heard that Keigo was scared and just paid the money. It seems that rumors about this situation spread quickly. My grandmother even quit her tea ceremony class and started staying home more. After the divorce, my ex-husband and mother-in-law were kicked out of the family. I later found out that Keigo's grandmother had actually been the president of the company where Keigo's father worked. She's the chairman now. Keigo and his family were stealing money from the company, and when the report came to her, Keigo's grandmother had to choose between her company and her grandson. Keigo's grandmother said, "Choose right now, the company or your foolish wife and grandson." Keigo's father chose the company without hesitation. Both Keigo and his mother were accused of a crime, but it seems they ran away quickly and are now missing. After the divorce was finalized, life got so much better for us. My mom and I rented a place and started living together with my son. I named my son Ayumu. I also learned a lot about my mom. She's good at crafts, has specific likes and dislikes, and enjoys certain colors. I didn't know any of this before. One day, I told my mom, "Thank you for everything," and she smiled, a little embarrassed. From then on, I promised to walk forward with my precious family.